I'm Rob, and this is Venturi Fab, and today we're putting the power in power steering. So we are adding hydraulic assist to my high steer on my Dana 60 on Merle here. And what that does is it adds this hydraulic ram to your steering bar, so when your big old giant 40-inch tires are bound up on like a rock or something, you have all this extra force pushing directly on your tie rod to help your tires turn so that you can steer easier off-road, because that's kind of important, right? So what it does is it takes pressure from your power steering box. When I rebuilt this box, I drilled and tapped it for Hydro Boost, and then those lines run to the ports on your cylinder. And then we need to make a mount off of my axle tube for the cylinder. It'll tuck up here, right around there. And it runs into the ports on here, pushes this rod in and out, which pushes your tie rod left and right, which makes you steer. Hi there. So, as I said, we're putting Hydro Boost in my truck. There are multiple ways to go about doing this. There's different ways that people set them up. There's different ways that they brace them. So this video is my way of doing that with my truck. I have high steer, right? Your crossover high steer. So my steering is very high and very tight to the axle. It's not like the traditional steering on this truck would be down here. So as a result of that, I already measured this. I'm going to show you right after this how to measure this. We're going to do this start to finish so you can set this up on your truck. But your original steering points are down here and low, which is fine. It works great. The purpose of the high steer is to tuck it up high and away from rocks. So if I got close to a rock or whatever, four-wheeling off-road, you might hit this and bend it and screw your steering up. If I hit this, I am probably in a much worse situation than my steering's bent. You know what I mean? So traditionally here, since your point of steering on your knuckle is further forward, it's further away from the center line of your ball joints or your kingpins, and it's further out, this rod moves 8 3/4 of an inch of travel. With my rod being so high and tight, mine only moves 4 3/4 inches. So it's significantly less movement because the pivot point for it, is only a couple inches off of my kingpin center line, versus this where it's a good half a foot, 8 inches off of the kingpin center line. So the movement is significantly less. So we don't need to worry about this. If you're doing it this way for one of these, I'll put it here. What a lot of people will do for their mounting solution, because I've got, we're off-road. A lot of us have these heavy-duty diff covers. A lot of people will mount their ram to the diff cover and then to your tie rod. The important part with hydraulic assist steering is you need a fixed point to mount your ram somewhere off your axle, right? Because it needs to move with your axle. So people build mounts off of the tube. They'll mount them off of the differential. Everyone's got their own thoughts on that, but you mount it to a fixed point and then it mounts to your tie rod. So we're going to do, get this out of the way, is I'm going to make a little tower back here, and we're going to mount it off that tower, but I'm going to keep it a little bit low so that I still have plenty of clearance for these lines when my axle goes up and it's not into this cross member, because you got to think about where everything's going to go as it's flexing. Oh, cat. think about where everything's going to go as it's flexing. And one of the difficulties with the high steer setup is that everything being high and tight is great for rock clearance. It's not great for frame clearance and engine clearance because everything's tucked higher from there. You're kind of trading one for the other. You get rid of one set of problems, you gain another set of problems. So we're going to end up placing this right around here. We're going to make a tower to mount this off of the tube. And then this end will mount to the tie rod. The key important points of that, like I said, one fixed position and then one position on your tie rod. It needs to not impact anything through the swing of your travel. And you want this, the throw of this, to be as parallel and straight with your tie rod as possible so you're not pushing it at an angle. Like if I mounted this down here and onto my tie rod like that, that's going to cause problems. It's not going to steer smooth. You're not pushing straight into the rod. You want to push with the tie rod. So I need to have this mounted straight with that. Like I said, I think we're going to end up being somewhere right around there. So the first piece I'm going to make is going to be my upright piece for this bottom mount, so that way we can kind of get that fit in there and then set this on it and start making the rest. But first, we'll start with the basics. Whether you have the low tie rod or the high tie rod, you still need to measure what your throw is so you order the correct ram. And that's what we're going to do right now. So you do that by measuring from a fixed point. What a lot of people will do is just maybe like pick a point off of your axle and set like a square up on it so that you can measure. The important thing is you need to make sure that doesn't move. If you saw my last video on 5 tools I wish I got sooner, laser level. This is where stuff like this shines. So I'm going to turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. We'll set this guy up and you can see what's going on, and then we'll show you what to do. Probably not showing up super great on the camera, but what this does is throw, a laser level line, and that line is right here. You might be able to see it. You can see it right here, right there. I'm right next to this welded bracket for the original steering stabilizer. So our line's right there. I already have it marked because, like I said, I already measured all this stuff. And then this is where this makes this super easy, right? Like I don't need to keep a level balanced on here or a straight edge or any of that. This is just projecting it on there, so I don't need to worry about anything moving. So we turn it the other way. Once again, I already have that marked. You measure in between them. And we're at 4 3/4. The problem with that is that the shortest ram PSC makes that's readily available, I'm sure they make custom stuff for people, but the shortest one they make that's readily available is 6 inches. So I need to find a way to de-stroke my 6-inch ram to 4 3/4 inches because it's a hydraulic ram. If your stroke on the ram is greater than the steering throw that you have, it can push through it and start breaking stuff and bending stuff. That's one of the reasons you need to push straight with your tie rod. And yeah, we don't want to break anything. We want this to work nice and smoothly. So there's 2 ways you can go about doing that. You can take this thing apart and limit the travel internally with spacers, which arguably is the better way. It's going to keep your overall length shorter because it limits the travel from coming out. But you got to disassemble this. There's some tricks to that. I don't really want to get into taking this thing apart. Because you can, you're opening up potential sealing issues and all of that, which is fine, but I'm on a time crunch to get this truck done. and I don't have time to deal with sealing issues and all that stuff right now. So we're going to limit it the easier way externally, which is we are going to have our thing set here. Here's the ram, and we're going to make a spacer to make up the difference. So with the ram all the way in, there's about an 1/8 inch gap between the nut and this face, this cap. So we're going to make, like I said, I have an 1.25 inch difference, right? I'm 4 3/4 inches of stroke on that. This is a 6-inch stroke ram, so that's 1 1/4 inches, and then I need to add that 1/8. So we're going to make a spacer out of aluminum so that it doesn't damage any of this, because this is all steel. We're going to make a spacer that's 1 3/8 inches long, or maybe just a touch over 1 3/8 inches, and limit the stroke of this ram to that size. So let's go do that. We'll get that on here, and then we can get to getting this thing set up. I cored a chunk of aluminum at work yesterday. So let's get this measured and set up. We want 1 3/8 inches. I'm going to go a 1/16 more because I'd rather lose a tiny bit of my stroke and not push any of my steering or any of that beyond what it's supposed to do than I would have an extra fraction of a bit of steering. So, besides, at full lock, my big old 40s are probably going to hit my springs before this tops out anyway. So, we got 1 3/8 inches plus tiny bit. We'll mark this around in a couple spots. Alright, so I got my piece cut to the correct length. We're just a hair over 1 3/8 inches. So we're going to extend this ram. I'm going to seat this down all the way. Or put this on, extend the ram, put this on, seat this down all the way, and then we're going to suck the ram back in to get our shortest configuration of this in there. And then we're going to turn. Oh, we'll get to that when we get there. So you want this to be snug, but not loose, right? So it needs to be loose enough that it'll slide, and tight enough that it's not like loose on here. There we go. So I want that side down, and that's going to rest against this cap so that this will all turn into the cap. Right about there. Pop this back in. And now our down travel is limited, so the only usable travel we have left is that 4 3/4 inches, or just a tiny bit less than 4 3/4 inches, is all that we've got left as usable travel. What we'll do eventually in the future, when I know I end up doing some crazy crap with the front suspension on this truck, at that point, and I'm redoing all that, I'll probably pull this thing apart and I'll make an internal spacer to get this packaging down a little bit more. But for right now, this is going to work just fine. So, I know this is going to live right here, and I need a height measurement to the bottom of this because we're going to make our standoff. And the important thing to do here when you're doing this, right, your tie rod swings in an arc. So because your knuckles swing, right? So when you're turned all the way to the left or all the way to the right, your tie rod is going to be further back in towards. So I'm all the way to the right now. So my tie rod is as close to the center line of my axle as it's going to be. When you're steering straight ahead, your tie rod's going to be as far forward of that as it's going to be. So all of these measurements that I'm doing right now are going to be set for this being as close as it is, which means I have this minimized and that needs to push that way, so I need to turn my steering wheel the other direction right now. This is all as close as it's ever going to be to my axle center line. So I'm building everything off of this so that way I know the stroke of my ram is the distance that this tie rod's going to move. So if I build everything maxed out this way, when this ram strokes out and it hits its limit, it's going to be at the limit of my steering. So I know that all of that will work out just fine. So we are going to build this bracket. And I need to make sure that I've got plenty of steering for the other side, which I do. I'll be up here because I don't want to run into anything over on that end. So it's only going to move 4.5 inches. There's 6. And I am like dang near centered over this. So, how do I want to do this? A tower that captures the top of this. Maybe we'll do that. Oh yeah, so I'm building pretty much centered to my dealio. So I'll probably rotate this so that my hoses line up along this, because you need to make sure they're not going to get pinched in your steering and they're not going to get pinched on the axle. So I'll have to figure out the best angle for the dangle on that, but and I don't want to push off of my U-joints off of this. I know a lot of people would just put a stud on here and call it good, and realistically that probably would be just fine, but I don't like that. So, alright, so we're going to make a 7.5 inch tall tower, put it in that way and have a little bit of a double shear. So in that case we'll make it 8 inches tall. I'll do a small break at the top so that I can split down onto this axle. Then we'll do a support in the middle. And that should be good. I think that'll probably work. And if I need to redo something better later, cross that bridge when I get there. As per my drawing here, we've got, this is our inside piece. So we need to go 1.5 inches in and bend this at 90. So there's our bend. What I'm going to do is rough this all in with everything square, and then we'll add in our gangster lean once it's together, which will be a little bit more of a pain in the it'll be a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but I think it'll give us a better final product. So these will be like that. This will fit in the middle. Alright, that one's good, that one's good. This little spacer stack that I made is the correct thickness for my bearing, and that's good. Nice and snug in there so there's no slop. So we have our 2 marks. I know that's the peak. I think a Danish 60 is 3 or 3.25 inches in diameter, so I'm going to get a 3-inch hole saw and just put the peak of the hole saw right at that in the middle. Well, important update, I don't have a 3-inch hole saw. I thought I could have sworn that I did. So we're going to look around the garage and find something that's about, 3 inches. Alright, well, it turns out that the inside diameter of a roll of Scotch blue tape is like a fraction below 3 inches. So it'll be close enough and we'll fine tune from there. So line that up. So we're going to trim this all down and then final fit it onto the car. Like I said, I think it's a touch more than 3 inches. So we'll get that and then open it up a tiny bit so that it fits on there perfect. We'll tack all this together, put it on there, make sure we're cool, and then we'll weld this piece all together and weld it on the car as a unit. Getting closer. Alright, that will do. Okay, so we got our holes, so that way this will be all spruced up, looking all smooth and sexy. And I'm gonna, so these are gonna end up getting angle cut, right? But I want this all to be square and I want this to be centered on here, and that's going to be a lot easier to do if I get this into position while this is straight. But doing that, getting especially this one on the bottom, but getting like this curve cut to how I like it and think it's going to look good and all that is going to be really hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim out this top section on both of them, and then I'll just leave these sides to get trimmed down after this is tacked together. So let's find a radius that we like. I think this 2-inch is just a skosh smaller. I think this is like probably 2 1/8 tube. So I'm going to do 2-inch and 2-inch. And so the top of my bracket will be 2 inches, and then they'll flare out from there down to the 3 at the bottom. I think that'll end up looking pretty good. So we're going to get this top cut. Alright, let's get this thing put together. So, to support this in the middle, I just took half of my distance, half of 3, 1.5 inches. This is 1/4 inch, so I subtract half of it to get my little stack, and then I just found random scraps that I had and measured them till I got it to the correct height. So I'll stack this up in the middle and we'll be golden. So let's get this thing all put together so we can tack it, and then we can fit it on the truck before we final weld it. And a material stack. Play social media real quick. If you guys follow over on Instagram or Facebook or the TikToks or any of those, I post little clips and stuff all throughout the week over there, every week, all the time. So if your weekly dose of Venturi Fab on the tubes isn't enough, then come join me over there. Alright, let's go check it out. So I'm going to let it cool down for a second because this thing's hot from that welding. But alright, let's see how we do. Obviously I didn't trim these tangs off yet because I wanted it all to be straight to tack it. So with those trimmed, this will sit up nice and flush with that. Here, let's take a gander, shall we? And it's nice and level with the bar. Got my It's flopping down right now. I got the tie rod pretty much in line with that. I don't have quite the right angle. I think right there. There we go. So my ram will be right here. Yeah, I'm digging it. Let's get these trimmed up. All right, so after holding that up on the axle, my tube's right here. This needs to be tucked super close to the tube. So to make these even, I'm gonna cut this straight down to where it's even with this one, and then that way the taper off of these will be the same. I'll have maximum clearance at my tie rod, so I won't have any issues. I can get my ram right up next to it and have fantastic push angle. So alright, that back one cut a little off, so I'll have to do a little fine tuning there, but I think that's going to be quite nice. All done. Now we let it cool down for a while, like all the way cool down. All right. Gonna get this into position. Alright, so our steering is all the way to the left, which means our ram's going to be as short as possible this way. So I'm going to put the ram together. We're going to put it up in here with the tabs for this side, and I'm going to get these tabs tacked on, and then we'll turn it left and right, make sure that I still have my full lock to lock, and then we can weld her together and get some paint on it. All right. and we got to figure out this line routing so that we have plenty of travel, so I don't run out of line through suspension, droop, and compression. It also doesn't bind up and hit anything or get pinched by anything while we're cycling the suspension. We just kind of have to look at it and figure that out, because clearly I can't cycle the suspension right now, you know what I'm saying? So let's grab those fittings and get to it, and then we're going to make some AN lines. Look at that, I got a little care package today. But you're going to have to wait until next week to see what's in that box. Alright, so we're on the home stretch here. It's time to make our power steering lines for the Ram. So we're going to do AN fittings on this. The PSC Rams come with Dash 6 AN fittings on them to use. I tapped my box for 3/8 NPT, I believe. And then those are 3/8 NPT to Dash 6 AN adapters. So power steering uses crazy high pressure compared to every other system on your car, right? Like your fuel pump, your fuel pump for a fuel injected motor is going to be typically in that like 50-60 psi range. A fuel pump for a carburetor is like 7 psi, right? Your oil pressure on a lot of cars, you're in that 30 to 60 range, right? Like most of this stuff is typically below 100 psi. Power steering systems are like 1200 plus psi. So you can't use regular fittings or regular AN fittings. So this is a power steering AN fitting. This is a standard AN fitting. And you can see the difference in the tips. See how much bigger this one is? Because the hose is like double reinforced with, we'll show you that in a second. The hose is like double reinforced with the stainless mesh crap inside it that's all impregnated in it and all that stuff. And then the fittings themselves, on a standard AN fitting, some of these couplers are, if I ever get this unthreaded, so a lot of them will have like little ridges in here. Some of them are reverse cut, like real loose threads just for the ridge. These ones, the other difference too is regular AN fittings are aluminum. These are steel. If you look in there, they're a lot more defined, but those are reverse spiral cuts. So when you'll get your hose end on here, you thread these onto your hose, and then you thread this into the whole assembly. So they're super locked in because they got to deal with all that extra pressure. The hoses, like I was saying, there's the end of the hose. You can see you got one layer, and then there's another layer of the steel in there. So they're super there. But beyond that, right, beyond the extra beefiness of these, you assemble them pretty much the same. So we're going to do a quick crash course in assembling AN fittings, and then I'm going to jam these together because I got to get this thing done. Today's Wednesday, so I need to get these made, installed, burp the system, run it, make sure everything's working and all that, and finish editing the video tonight without, dooming myself to like 2 hours of sleep. So what you do with AN fittings, the lines on this stuff has that braided core on it, so you need to cut it with like a cutoff wheel or something. Cut it as straight as you can. Okay, if you have crooked cut AN line or AN hose into your AN fittings, regardless of if they're power steering fittings or regular fittings, your chances of it sealing correctly are not very good. So let's cut this real quick. So the purpose of the tape on here when you're cutting these is to keep these ends from fraying. And additionally, when you're cutting through it, the heat from your cutoff wheel kind of melts this braided covering a tiny bit, which is also kind of nice because it helps keep it from fraying when you put these together. So some people like to leave the tape on when they put them into the fittings. I was always taught you're not supposed to do that because that extra thickness of the tape can kind of mess with the sealability of it. But as you can see, you tape it, it stays nice and good. You take your new fitting, and it's a reverse cut thread. So we'll thread it on here. Oops. Helps if I turn the right way. And you can feel when it bottoms out in there, and you can also look through this hole and see that my fitting is in fact bottomed out. So we're going to take my AN vice jaws here, which these are primarily made for the aluminum ones because, like, especially when you're dealing with fancy ones like this, you don't want to mar them up. So these are aluminum. It's not as big of a deal with the stainless or the steel fittings. You can do this with 2 wrenches, but it's so much easier with a vise, and soft jaws for a vise are so affordable. There's just really no reason not to do it that way. The next thing you want to do is put a little bit of lube on this just to help it go in there. So let me grab some lube. So depending on what's going to go in these lines, I might change up what lube I'm going to use, because some chemicals don't go well together. For this is getting hydraulic oil in it because it's power steering, so it's not getting hydraulic fluid, it's going to get power steering fluid, but that's considered a hydraulic fluid. So I'm just going to use some Marvel Mystery Oil on it. We're just going to put a little bit on there, smear it on. We don't need it like bathing in fluid, you just want enough so that it will go in smoothly. And then we're going to go in and start threading this thing in here, which for these fittings is a 1/2 inch. I don't know what size this one is because I have soft jaws. I've got soft jaws at work. I've got soft jaws at home. It's what I always use. So when you're screwing this in, you just want to watch your hose. Just keep an eyeball on it. Make sure it's not pushing it out. A lot of times, especially with traditional AN fittings, right, that it's not screwed onto your hose to capture it. If you don't have it seated in there all the way, or if you're going in a little too dry or something like that, sometimes it'll start trying to push your hose out, and then when you get it on and you get any sort of pressure to it, it'll blow the hose off. So just a little bit of extra, something to keep an eyeball on. And then you just tighten that all the way down. This one's done. So we're going to get the other one done. Then we'll run out there onto the truck, route them the way that we're going to route them, check for clearance. If I need to shorten these hoses at all, we'll see what we need to shorten them, cut them, get the hoses on the other end, and we can start bleeding this bad boy. All right. Take these caps off. I still kind of got to figure out exactly how I want to route this. But one of these hoses is a little bit longer than the other because one of the ports is a little bit further away than the other one. So there's my longer hose. So we kind of got to figure out how we want to run this, because we got breather line for the diff, air line for the arb. Kind of want to lock these in. So I think we're going to be like that. I don't want to be too close to my headers. I don't want it to get bound up on anything. It needs to have enough flex in it to handle my axle dropping out without catching on anything, without dragging on my other drag link and my tie rod there. So needs to be up and away from everything, but have movement. So let's look around here a bit. I can't go through here because this all gets really close. Like I said, my headers are all close there. So if I remember correctly, top is left, Bottom is right, so these will just be in here like that. Then they're away from my tires. I think that just might work. I just got to get this all locked in a little better. So we'll do left first. This guy's going to go like right there. I want to lock this down away from my steering shaft, so we'll do some sort of strap through here. Something like that. Double check that. That'll give us a good bit of extra that I can maneuver around. Maybe we'll just zip tie it to this, to my shock tower here, because we just got to keep it away from my column and away from this steering. So something like that. That'll probably work. I'm not just pulling these off yet because this whole system's full of fluid. So I want these made so when I pull these off one at a time, we minimize how much of a giant mess I'm about to make. Alright, so we'll try to minimize our mess here. We got my right fittings right here. Got my wrench. Everything else is sealed. All my lines are sealed. Everything's sealed. Let's try to minimize the mess. Come on. Get the right angle. Thread on there, boy. I think I am definitely going to order some hose separators. I've got hose separators for dash 6, but this hose is bigger. This is like dash 8 hose, so I'm going to get some hose separators for dash 8. But for now, use some zip ties to hold them together. A little snippy snip. And all we got left now is bleeding the system, and I hope these are hooked up the right way. Like I said, if I remember correctly, this middle port is for turning left, which is what it's hooked up to, and this bottom port's for turning right. If it don't steer, then we'll know that they're backwards, and I'll do a little reconfiguring and switch them, but I'm like 99% sure this is right. We got all our hoses bundled up over here. These should have plenty of flex to accommodate this thing swinging down. Plenty in there. Yeah, I think we're golden, guys. Alright, so we got to bleed this thing now. So the way you do that, before you crank everything up and start just pumping pressure through it, is we need to get power steering fluid through those lines. This might get a little bit messy because I'm Hydro Boost, and we're going to turn the wheel left and right, lock to lock, like 20 or 30 times. I'm going to hop out every few and check my reservoir and top it off as needed, because I'm definitely going to need to add more power steering fluid to it. Sometimes with Hydro Boosts, and I don't know if it's, maybe there's just something weird with mine, but I've seen it happen on multiple trucks and stuff, is my reservoir is not the low point in my system. The low point in my system, or the normally like your reservoir would be like your higher point in your system, which means all your air is going to flow up to that, but it's higher, so it's got all the gravity pressing down. I have Hydro Boost in this, so my power steering pump is below, and my reservoir for it is below my Hydro Boost unit. So this might get a little noisy, a little messy. We'll find out. But for now, we're just going to crank left to right a whole bunch. And if I make a mess, I make a mess. But this is going to start working fluid through those lines so that my ram will work. And it's not fighting me at all yet. So I feel like I'm on the right track here as far as hooking it up correctly left and right, because otherwise it'd be trying to push fluid into the left and right side versus into, you know what I mean. You get what I mean. I'm rambling. it would be trying to, even right now, it would be trying to push fluid in and fight me. And it's not at all. Eventually, I really do want to get like the full PSC giddy up with the pump and their reservoir that's like remote and you can set it up higher. That would be absolutely killer. But that's like $2,000, and I don't know about you, especially dragging all these freaking cars home. I ain't got no $2,000 laying around to buy a power steering pump when mine works. So, all right, well, it's definitely moving fluid where it needs to be. Oh, we're going this way. My reservoir was about empty. Pretty happy that I don't feel like I'm fighting myself at all here. Not really getting much more fluid loss in the reservoir. We'll do this like 5 more times. And then we'll start this thing up. And moment of truth. And it's going to be loud when we do that because I'm open headers right now. Fun fact, I'm an idiot, and I love this truck even more now, because in my haste and excitement to fire this thing up, because I just put my header back on yesterday, or day before, or whatever, from doing all the transmission-y stuff, and I still got to do the exhaust hookups and all that. I never hooked my spark plug wires back up. I thought it was chugging along kind of weird, but it like fired right up. And let's do this again with all of these cylinders firing instead of just 4. But on the gangster side of that, Merle runs on 4 cylinders. You can completely wipe out an entire bank and this thing will still run. That's more better.
For 9 years, my peers seen a couple fades, seen a couple go light years ahead. When it's said and done, I'm glad I'm right here. Build myself a little empire off an idea. I've been juggling the music, the fitness, the business, the shit that I love fills my cup. It's the sickest, the peace sign up to the bozos and bitches. I'm glad that my life don't fit your description. Get stage fright, throw me the mic, make the crowd. It's okay if you hate, you can suck my. I still run shit with a toy. I'm loving when it's good, they face, they turn purple. Drop a track, killing the game is so hurtful. Life's all about how you handle the show. When it's me, Jay, and Joe, we don't need no rehearsals now.
Alright, well, hydraulic assist. Done. Sorry, I got a little excited and I already crossed it off my my cardboard list. So we don't get to do that one together. But I promise I won't do that next weekend. So this weekend, cage. Going back in Merle. So next week's episode will be the roll cage. The week after that will be the rear bumper and whatever other miscellaneous stuff I'm able to get done. And then we got 2 weeks. That's it. After those two videos, the next one will be this bad mamma jamma cruising through the soup bowl on the Rubicon. And the gatekeeper and little sluice and all those little obstacles that we love to watch people destroy their stuff on the internet. So remember, if you don't get started setting deadlines so that you actually get your junk done, you'll probably never get finished.